8. Shimon Hayot. Shimon Hayot, or Simon Leviev, is an Israeli conman with a long history of theft, forgery, and fraud, dating back to 2011. Between 2017 and 2019, he met women through dating apps, borrowed money, then left them with the debts. Leviev lured new victims in by taking them on lavish first dates and pretending to be an heir to a multi-billion-dollar fortune. After establishing some trust, he told them some enemies were after him. He said he was unable to use his credit card for security reasons and convinced the women to open lines of credit and take loans out for him to use. When Leviev failed to pay them back, he used stalling tactics, harassment, and intimidation to get the girls off his case. By the time his crimes were exposed, he'd stolen over $10 million from his so-called girlfriends. In 2019, the Norwegian website VG published an expose called The Tinder Swindler. After the story broke, one of his victims, Eileen Coleman, pretended to feel sorry for Simon to gain his trust. She convinced him she could sell some of his designer clothes, but kept the money for herself, and her revenge didn't end there. While Leviev was on the run as a fugitive, Coleman told Interpol of his plans to fly to Greece. They were able to arrest him with this information. By then, he'd already done some prison time for frauding women. This time he was sentenced to 15 months. He was released after 5 months, but is still wanted in at least 4 countries. In a CNN interview in early 2022, Leviev denied being a con man and claimed he was just a single guy looking to meet women. He's been banned from several dating apps, and Tinder published new guidelines in light of the case to help users uncover scammers. 7. Andrew Burfield. In April 2022, a 33-year-old single mum from Lancashire, England named Katie Kenyon went missing after going on a picnic with her on and off-again boyfriend, 50-year-old Andrew Burfield. Her concerned family immediately pointed the finger at Burfield, who first told investigators that Katie went to rehab. He eventually cracked under pressure though and admitted she was dead, but that it was an accident. Burfield claimed Katie had dared him to try knocking a can of soda out of her hand with an axe. He said he reluctantly went along with the game and that the axe somehow hit Katie in the head. In the meantime, authorities searched for Katie's remains, but it was so well hidden that even a forensic archaeologist couldn't find it. Detectives finally convinced Burfield to take them to her body, and an autopsy revealed she was brutally bludgeoned to death from at least 12 strikes to the head. With this new information, Burfield was charged with murder. During his trial, it was revealed that Katie had been served with a court-ordered death notice for $5,240 a few months before her death. It was for money Burfield claimed she owed him, and despite Katie's best efforts to make a payment plan, Andrew pursued the case through the legal system. As Katie grew fearful that bailiffs would show up at her house and take her belongings, Burfield told the collection agency she had assets including a vehicle and a bicycle she bought for her son, and told them they could find her at home. At the same time, he told Katie that he loved her and encouraged her to check into a mental hospital. He even offered to pay for the stay. A month before the murder, Katie sent her mother a text message describing her lover as a Tinder swindler who conned her out of thousands of dollars and was now harassing her through the debt collection system. After months of maintaining innocence, Burfield changed his plea to guilty. He'll most likely be sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term that will be set by a judge sometime in late 2022. 6. Renan Augusto Gomez. 36-year-old Renan Augusto Gomez gained international notoriety as the so-called Brazilian Tinder swindler in 2022 after he scammed at least 7 women. He's accused of targeting wealthy girls between the ages of 34 and 40 through dating apps and preying on their sympathy with a sob story about being an orphan. The con man posed as an engineer and told his victims he was the son of German parents who died in a car accident. In his Tinder profile, he wrote that he was looking for a serious relationship and that women who weren't should skip his profile. He also claimed he'd been single for a year, while in reality he was seeing and scamming multiple women at a time. One alleged victim who works as a teacher claimed that Gomez stole over $28,000 from her. During the 4 months they dated, he convinced her to lend him money. Gomez told her and the other women he targeted that he owed back taxes and had some complicated financial problems with banks. Once they forked over the cash, he vanished without paying back a penny. Police started searching for Gomez in late 2021. They caught up with him 9 months later in Sao Paulo and arrested him after a short vehicle chase. Authorities believe there may be more victims and are waiting to see if anyone else comes forward with accusations. 5. Kelly Bryan. In early 2022, actress and singer Kelly Bryan shared her experience with a swindler on a British talk show called Loose Women. She described how she started dating a man who made a similar amount of money as her and said there were no financial issues between them at the start of the relationship. But he lost his job and she suddenly found herself fully supporting him. In Kelly's words, one thing led to another, and before she knew it, she was knee-deep in a toxic relationship where the man controlled every aspect of her life, despite her being the major breadwinner. She said he convinced her to give him her credit cards so he wouldn't feel emasculated by having to ask for money. Kelly realized she was being conned when her bank called to ask her about some suspicious transactions. She said the experience made her realize that a lot of people judge victims of con artists for not seeing the signs, but a person doesn't know how capable they are of being deceived until they've actually been in the situation. 4. Howard O'Keefer. For over a decade, Howard O'Keefer represented at least 16 criminal defendants in federal courts across the United States. He claimed to be specialized in the U.S. Bureau of Prisons policies, practices, and regulations. But he never actually went to law school, passed the bar exam, or graduated college. He also had an extensive criminal record, which includes convictions for grand theft, passing bad checks, and even stealing a cable TV. Kiefer somehow still managed to con the court into letting him act as a defense attorney and collected over $150,000 in client fees, as well as payments from the government before anyone realized what he was up to. He also attended prestigious conferences where he convinced other attendees he was qualified to practice law. Several attorneys even referred him to clients after hearing that he did a good job on similar cases in the past, and they also helped get Kiefer admitted to courts in districts throughout the country. Authorities finally wised up to the scheme in 2008 when an unhappy client reported his suspicions that Kiefer was a fraud. An investigation ensued, and one court after another realized they had no official records of Kiefer having a valid law license. It was also discovered that he never went to law school. Kiefer was soon disbarred and convicted of mail fraud and providing false statements. He was sentenced to 51 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay $120,000 in restitution. After being freed on supervised release, he allegedly broke the rules he was supposed to follow and flooded the courts with one appeal after another. The case continued for years, and in 2018 he was sentenced to 24 months in prison. 3. Antonio Marriott Wilson. The women who dated Antonio Marriott Wilson between 2015 and 2018 knew him as either Bryce Carrington or Dr. Tony Marriott. During that time, Wilson dated at least 4 women, including famous actress Jennifer Lewis, who starred in a sitcom called Blackish. He lied, saying he was a Navy SEAL, an Oxford graduate, a Bible scholar, and even a UCLA professor. Wilson also convinced girls he was an up-and-coming entrepreneur, and the big-name companies like ABC Television and EA Games had hired him as a software developer and audio engineer. He also claimed to have tens of millions worth of backing from high-profile investors. Believing Wilson's next big success was just around the corner, his unsuspecting girlfriends invested large amounts of money in businesses that were total shams. He used their money to finance his lavish lifestyle and pay bills, while cleverly hiding the fact that he had done prison time for fraud. By the time the law caught up with Wilson a second time, he'd conned his victims of $387,000. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and received an 8-year prison sentence, and was also ordered to pay $272,000 in restitution to 3 women who've not yet been paid back. The judge also banned him from using aliases on social media and professional networking sites in the future. In a victim impact statement, Lewis said it wasn't the fraud or the embarrassment of being swindled that hurt her the most, but the damage he did to her heart, the emotional impacts of his crimes, and the feeling of safety he took away from her. 2. Raimi Marston. In a shocking case of serial fraud that earned her the nickname of Sea Coast Swindler, a New Hampshire woman named Raimi Marston made news headlines after hiring a live-in nanny in 2007 and stealing the victim's identity. The nanny moved out after a few months when her relationship with Marston crumbled. She soon discovered over $61,000 worth of unauthorized charges were made in her name during her employment. Marston was quickly convicted of felony fraud and received a 15-month prison sentence, but that was just the beginning. In 2009, she was arrested for bankruptcy fraud and writing bad checks. At the time, she was on house arrest for the nanny case. While out on bail in 2011, Marston started dating a man named Scott McCarthy. She convinced him to loan her almost $9,000 for rent and veterinary bills and promised he would be repaid by her father, who she claimed was a high-profile gangster. When that never went through, McCarthy contacted Marston's probation officer. An investigation uncovered that she'd used the money to pay for a puppy, tea products, music downloads, furniture, hotel rooms, restaurant bills, a diamond ring, and more. Around the same time, Marston was accused of moving out of 2 rental properties she owed at least $11,000 in unpaid rent for. She wound up back in prison several times over the next few years for her criminal activity. Just 3 days after being released in 2018, Marston and her soon-to-be husband, a convicted bank robber named Robert Allen Peters, opened accounts with fraudulent checks at an Alabama bank. A few months later, Marston applied for a college loan using the name of a co-signer without that person's consent. She was convicted of bank fraud and aggravated identity theft in early 2022 and was sent back to prison for 54 months. 1. George Cameron. Between 2003 and 2015, a Burlington, New Jersey man named Leaford George Cameron fraudulently practiced law under a fake legal firm that went by several names, including Cameron and Associates, Cameron Hamilton and Associates, and Bernstein Cameron Hamilton and Associates. He collected over $200,000 in bogus fees from nearly 100 clients living in several states and India. He mostly represented people in immigration cases. Throughout the long-running scam, Cameron used at least 4 known attorney identification numbers belonging to real lawyers in Pennsylvania while filing legal paperwork. Authorities finally caught onto his scam in 2015 and charged him with mail fraud, wire fraud, and making false statements. It was the 3rd time Cameron had been caught impersonating an attorney, despite never being a lawyer. In fact, he was on probation for a previous conviction when he was arrested for the most recent case. Prosecutors accused him of providing substandard legal services to his victims, many of which were low-income clients who believed their money was paying for adequate representation. In one case, a client lost their home to foreclosure, and at least one other person was wrongfully deported thanks to Cameron's unqualified service. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison and will be 77 years old when he's released. Hopefully by then he'll have different priorities and will avoid the con artist life. Thanks for watching. What would you do if someone tricked you into giving them thousands of dollars? Let me know in the comments below.